Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to be talking about some of Web3's decentralized networks. With me, I've got Abai from Helium, Ariel from Hive Mapper. All the way down at the end, we have Paul from Teleport, and right in the middle, we've got Daniel from Hotspotty. First off, since not everyone knows who these guys are or what they're working on, we're going to let them introduce themselves and kind of talk about what they're working on. So if we want to start all the way down at the end with Paul from Teleport.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name's Paul. I'm a founder of Teleport, and Teleport is the first ride-sharing company built on the ride-share protocol, Trip. What we're doing is we're taking ride-sharing from the world of Uber's client only talks to Uber, Lyft only talks to Lyft, to an open protocol like email, where you have Apple Mail, Google Mail, Outlook, everything talks with each other. The ride-sharing protocol rewards the drivers and the people operating the network and who bring the most liquidity in drivers and customers. So we are liberating transportation from monopolies and bringing it into the age of Web3.
Yeah. Go ahead. Or I'll start with Abai, since you guys kind of work together somewhat.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I'm Abai Kumar. I'm the CEO of the Helium Foundation. And the Helium Network is the world's largest decentralized wireless network. You can think of us like Airbnb or Uber, but for telecom, where you, as an individual, can permissionlessly put an antenna and a radio on your roof, in your house, in your coffee shop, wherever people need coverage or things need coverage to the internet. And you can provide that coverage, and you earn tokens for that coverage.
If you want to go ahead, Daniel, sorry.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. My name is Daniel. I actually live in Portugal. I'm the co-founder of a company called Hotspotty. We started this company thanks to Helium, actually. We started deploying hotspots late 2020 in Portugal and realized there was a big need to manage those devices. So we are right now, we call it a coordination layer on top of decentralized infrastructure projects. We started with Helium. Now we're moving to help other projects as well with the management and planning of devices.
Great. And if you want to wrap it up, Abai. Or Ariel.
Yeah. All right. So we're building this decentralized global map. So the way we're building the map is quite different than historically it's been built. So you buy this dash cam. It looks and smells like every other dash cam in the world, but it does two really important and special things. The first thing it does is it takes all that imagery from the dash cam and then uploads it automatically to our map. So we're actually building this decentralized global map from all the imagery. And then the second thing it does is it functions effectively as a crypto miner. So you're actually mining honey tokens, and that's your reward for helping us build this decentralized global map. So that's on the contributor side. On the customer side, most people don't realize that, yes, you use Google Maps on your iPhone, your Android device, but there's about 8 million businesses, FedEx, UPS, Airbnb, Uber, many others, that pay Google Maps and others a lot of money to go and build and use that mapping data and those mapping APIs. So that's the customer group that we're going after, is those roughly 8 million businesses who pay on an annual basis for map data.
Great. So kind of where we want to start this talk off with, it's titled Why Decentralized Data Networks Matter. A lot of these services and protocols kind of exist in the real world as is, but when you add an element of decentralization, and depending on what product it is, that could look differently. So kind of what I want to start off the conversation with is, why does it matter to your product? And by the word decentralization, what do you mean? So what is it adding that like a centralized counterpart like Uber or like Google Maps or even just like Wi-Fi, cellular service generally lacks? What does this decentralized element matter? We can start down at the end again, Paul, with Teleport.
Yeah, so I think in ride-sharing, the drivers have not been treated overly well over the time, and I think companies have often made promises that, if it was us in charge, if Lyft was in charge instead of an Uber, things would be better for the drivers. I think decentralization, or rather credible decentralization, is most powerful when you have an entity that you can't fully trust. I think we have natural monopolies in certain spaces. Ride-sharing is one of them. Marketplaces in general are a really good example. And I think if you just replace one ride-sharing company with another ride-sharing company, you're not going very far. The drivers are not going to believe you that you're not going to do the same thing to them, charging them 40% plus in fees. You're going to do that again. And even if you had good intentions and you tried to do this, your shareholders, and it takes a lot of money to build a ride-share company, your shareholders would force you, again, to squeeze the maximum out of this natural monopoly. So people call that a revolution. The ride-share revolution in that case would just be the people on top go to the bottom, someone else is on top. Now, decentralization allows us to essentially create a protocol that is credibly decentralized. It's actually owned by the drivers, the riders, the builders, the operators of the rideshare companies, and they can all work together in creating an open marketplace for transportation. So anyone can start a ride-sharing company, anyone can start a client. They all cooperate on building the network, but they compete on services and price.
Next up, we can, Ariel, if you kind of want to take away with that.
Sure. So, look, when Waze was acquired by Google Maps for I think it was like $1.2 billion, there was a set of people within Waze. There's kind of two contributor groups within Waze, right? There are the people like you and I driving around being like, there's speed, there's a police guy here, don't speed, all that kind of stuff. And then there's the other part, which are these, what they refer to as Waze map editors. And there's about 30,000 of these people who sit behind a desktop computer and are like constantly editing the map, right? Like really, really tedious type of stuff. And so when Google acquired them for $1.2 billion, the investors made money, they should make money, employees made money, they should make money. All of those people who actually created the map and contributed to the map, they made nothing. They did get a Google T-shirt, right? But beyond that, they got nothing. And I look at that and I was like, that's absurd. That's bullshit, right? And another kind of I've been in a room with a very, very large customer. I was there, representing HiveMapper. There was a representative from Google. And they were willing to spend $40, $50 million to get Google to be able to refresh their map in specific parts of the world at a much, much higher cadence. And Google was like, we don't care. Like, we're just not going to do this. Not high enough on our priority list, right? And so when you look at something like HiveMapper, if HiveMapper is successful, all those people who are contributing to it will be fine, right? They have, through Honey, effectively this ownership stake in it, and they'll do very nicely, right? And then the other side, if a customer comes and says, look, I want to be refreshing Manila more frequently, right? Or I want to be refreshing Lagos, Nigeria more frequently, great. It's a marketplace, and it'll automatically happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, Abai, we're going to start with you, and then we'll jump again to Hotspotty. But in terms of like, why does the decentralization matter? Like, what features does it add? I know Helium's kind of like the first iteration of these networks, or one of the earliest ones. Yeah. So I think you guys transitioning, from your own network now to being live on Solana can really speak to what like the crypto element adds to something like decentralized web services almost.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I could tell a little sort of history of Helium first, and that might actually help guide that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So Helium Systems, the original company that sort of founded the Helium network, is actually almost a 10-year-old company. It started off building sort of a full stack IoT solution, and I think the most interesting part of that history is that, as soon as you sort of decide to build a sensor, a gateway, like the internet backhaul for that, the data plane, and all the sort of analytics that you need, because when you're a company, you don't want to get a sensor, you don't want to get the gateway, and you don't want to have to put it all together. You kind of want a packaged product, and that's what they started with. They started with a packaged product. But the problem is that sensor, as soon as it left the campus or wherever the gateways were just deployed, that sensor was useless. And people solve this in different ways. Like, you can solve this with different protocols. So let's say we use Wi-Fi. With Wi-Fi, every place you go, you need to authenticate. You need to, what's the SSID? What's the password? Or maybe you have a cert or something like that. You can solve this with 3G, 4G, or 5G. And now you have a pretty expensive radio, and you have a pretty expensive phone plan. So really, Helium was looking for the best of all of these different worlds. And the thing that we sort of got to was, why don't we incentivize people to provide that coverage, incentivize them to sort of verify that coverage, because you can sort of permissionlessly say that I'm in Antarctica, sure. But so the core incentive model that we designed, sort of both had the payments for actual data transfer, which is really what the point of all this is, but also sort of tried to solve the bootstrap problem that most marketplaces have, which is, you can't, if you don't have supply, you won't get demand, and if you don't have demand, the supply won't come and provide that coverage. And so, where Helium came in, and we were early on this journey, and there are so many other sort of proof of physical work companies now and projects now, and there's another term called Tippin, like all sort of lots of different projects that are coming out that are they're really sort of exploring different kinds of physical deployments, and really it's only possible to do this with a decentralized network, in my opinion, with an enormous community that's willing to do this. Ultimately, building telecom is a very expensive enterprise. As you've seen, like highly capitalized companies are the ones that are doing this typically. And we took a different approach. And our bet as a network is that by sort of pushing that CapEx out to the edges, allowing people to spend a small amount of money, and sure, $400 or $500 is not small for everyone, but relatively small amount of money compared to what these large telcos are doing. We believe that is a better way to build a network, because ultimately Helium is about providing ubiquitous and affordable connectivity for people and things.
Yeah, that's great. So to kind of wrap up, we have Daniel, who again, his company Hotspotty kind of sits on top of these networks, at least Helium to start. And I think you mentioned that you're expanding the list of who you're servicing. But do you think the entire kind of like network stack needs to be decentralized, or can it maintain some elements of centralization because you have to coordinate these different networks?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to build what we're building right now on a decentralized way. We have ideas how to. We call ourselves a Web 2.5 company because we're like still like Web 2 for some aspects. We interact a lot with Web 3 companies as well. I think, for example, the move to Solana is going to make us become a company Breakpoint 738. We're moving towards the 3 part of things, like being able to add like DeFi aspects to DY, decentralized wireless. But going back to your question as well, I think then zooming out a little bit, the infrastructure it's very expensive to build any kind of infrastructure, right? Talking about telco, for example. And what Ariel was mentioning, that companies only care about the profits. So if there's one location in the city that maybe is like a less wealthy part of the city, but it's not going to bring a lot of money for these companies, they don't care about because it's not profitable enough for them. So those people who live there won't have the infrastructure they need, where the other people have just as like a base level of like decency, right? I think enabling people to build infrastructure, build some sort of passive income from that, in a way that everybody profits in the end, it's the future. While Hotspot we're not necessarily building a protocol. We're looking at all the different tipping or DY or decentralized infrastructure projects and figuring out how can we help them succeed or succeed faster, because it's a really hard problem to build this infrastructure. Like, we've been following Helium for the past over 2 years. They've done an amazing job. It's incredibly hard problems to solve. Then we can see like how every time there's a big problem, they figure out how to do it. But there's also need some sort of like coordination between the communities to help it move, build faster. So we're very happy to be building with Helium, on top of Helium, and helping them expand the network faster in a way that DY, or whatever you want to call it, can succeed faster.
That's great. So kind of the second half of the panel, I kind of wanted to talk like where the projects are at and also where they're going. I think someone who works in crypto analogously, the way I kind of think about this is there's like a simplicity element to these networks that needs to maybe be abstracted away, because if you have a token incentivized network here and a token incentivized network here, you have to make them communicate. You have to have your users understand what they are, or at least have like an abstracted away layer where they understand where they're at. So I'm kind of wondering, how do you guys see that simplicity versus decentralized like element play out versus each other? I know some of you are integrated with Helium, some of you are planning to integrate and use Helium. So we'll start with you, and then we can kind of go down the line and talk about that play. It looks different for each of your networks, but.
Sure, yeah, I mean, I have the benefit of a bit of hindsight now, I guess, since we've been at it for a few years. And so, take that with a grain of salt, I guess. But, I think ultimately, it's not about the first 10,000 users. It's not about the first 100,000 users. At this point, we have almost 1 million hotspots deployed all over the world, 72,000 cities. You're not able to do that unless you kind of make it easier for normal people to interact with. And ultimately, like when we first built, and I was formerly at sort of the Nova Labs team until about this week, and now I'm focused purely on the protocol. But in the Nova Labs team, like we really cared about user experience, and that's my background as well, is to really focus on that. And so, what is the experience of setting up a hotspot if you don't know anything about crypto and you don't know anything about radios? And that is the reality of the Helium network. The majority of the people, there's over 700,000 active wallets in the on the Helium L1 right now. Wallets, and then 1 million hotspots that are deployed, right? So these are just humans. Like this is like my mom. Like how does my mom use Helium? And ultimately, it's about providing a really seamless user experience just from the start. Here's your hotspot. You press a button. You activate over Bluetooth LE. It connects to your Wi-Fi. And now you're just earning crypto. And that's it. Like, that's all you need to do. Oh, is it not near a window? Maybe you should put it by the window. You get on Discord and someone tells you about this like cool new antenna that you can put on. Oh, you're thinking about putting it outside. Well, here's a great case that you can put it on. And you really can go down this rabbit hole. And we have a ton of people in our community, and it's entirely like self-organized, which is the best part of these kinds of networks, in my opinion. All of these people sort of help each other with antennas. I mean, Hotspotty is actually a perfect example of this, and I'm going to tee you up here a little bit. But like, coordination in the physical space is still hard, right? Because ultimately, we're all building in the physical world, and human interaction is still necessary to build these kinds of networks. And you can have economic pressure to sort of design a network, at a network-wide level, but you still need human on-the-ground building, and you need people to talk to each other. And I think that Hotspotty was like a cool old feature that I think you guys are about to probably deprecate because there may be a better way to do it now. But like, you could just send a message on Discord with sort of to every single hotspot in your area. And this is sort of a rapidly deployed and sort of turn it up and turn it down, a private channel just for you and your neighbors. And say, hey, it looks like your antenna's pointed in the wrong direction. Point it over here instead, and we'll both get the benefit of this. And that's really what sort of the direction that I think this is going, where this is like, we have to bridge the sort of the crypto part and the tokens part and all of that with the sort of human part, which is like, we just all need to interact with each other.
Yeah, next we'll jump to Hive Mapper. Just how are you guys thinking about integrating, but also usability generally? You have a lot of, not necessarily competitors, but like early lookouts for users, early comparison apps.
So we definitely benefited. Helium was like kind of the grandfather, the patriarch of this whole space, right? In a lot of ways. So we definitely benefited from that, especially in the crypto community. We really have like two audiences, like the crypto enthusiasts, and then we have the mapping geeks, right? And they are for the most part like fairly early adopters. But the thing that we always remember internally when we're building and designing these products is saying like, look, ultimately, this is going to get deployed at like an Uber driver, a Lyft driver. They don't give, honestly, they don't give a shit about like maps and whatever. They're just like, hey, here's an awesome dash cam that serves a utility to them in terms of insurance and safety. And the fact that it's doing mapping is just icing on the cake, right? If it's not a good device from a security and a safety perspective, it's quite frankly less interesting to them. So the entire experience has to be incredibly passive for that Uber driver. And it has to just be incredibly easy from a setup perspective. So if you come to our headquarters, it looks a lot like a Web 2 company in terms of we have design teams, user research teams, going out into the field, doing all that kind of all that typical stuff. So if you're going to get to, let's say, 1 million or 2 million or 3 million contributors, which is kind of like roughly what we ultimately need here, like the thing has to be easy to use. And I give credit to these guys at Helium because like when I first bought a hotspot, it was actually really easy, right? Like I wasn't expecting that, especially from like a crypto company. And so we definitely took our cues and saying, okay, like that, when you get that dash cam, you take it out, the entire experience should take you roughly 10 minutes, which it does. So we're happy about that.
That's super good. Hotspotty, Daniel, if you want to.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think making things easy is super important, especially because we're working in the physical world where you want to enable anyone to join. It's not only the geeks that, for example, if you want to run any kind of miner, you need to like download Docker, you need to understand Linux, SSH into servers. All the stuff that we like to do, we can expect my mom to do it. And my mom wants to be a Helium validator or like a Helium node operator. And that's only, you can only do this through building really simple things, make it like that anyone can understand. People don't even need to understand English, for example. It's super easy for you to just like plug and play. And that's something that along with like following the same kind of like philosophy that you guys are building, we're trying to do the same thing with Hotspotty. Like we work with like UX researcher, we have a UX designer. They spend a lot of time figuring out how can we make things as easy as more trivial to understand, because we believe that that's the only way that those networks are going to actually grow, right? Because you need mass, you need like normal people deploying those things.
And Paul, if you want to go ahead, I know you guys had your kind of inauguration here. So if you want to talk about that and talk about the user experience and how you guys think about it at Teleport, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're pumped. We actually had, we've given hundreds of people on board. We've onboarded hundreds of people into our app that is live right now for testing.
Really good.
Here in Lisbon, we've given hundreds of rides. We've enabled people to experience Web3 ride sharing. But when I say Web3 ride sharing, a lot of people don't understand the scope of what we're doing. And so to talk to that, I feel like we're kind of like a Manhattan project of Web3 usability. Because the problem that you're facing if you're trying to do a Web3 company that is used by normal people is you have to figure out how to interact with the real world, just like everyone else here on the panel. For us, that means normal people right now use credit cards. So the cool thing about ride sharing is you can actually pay what we call an adapter companies. We take our open source code, it will be open sourced in a little bit, we wrap it in an LLC, and we get into the App Store, we get a bank account, we get a credit card processor, and you can pay us with a credit card. We can then take that money, send it to a contract on the Trip protocol, the rideshare protocol, which is powered by Solana, and make sure that all the parties that need to be paid for background checking, for customer support, for operating in cities, getting the insurance and the licenses get paid. Now the cool thing for the driver is already background checked because drivers for safety purposes need to be background checked. The driver receives USDC immediately after every ride in a full Solana wallet that is compatible with all the wallets that are already out there. So the driver can immediately spend. So now in terms of investing in the ecosystem here at Solana, that means we're onboarding millions of drivers, millions of users, no extra steps, and it's up to the community to figure out where can they spend this money that is now in the Solana ecosystem on Solana Pay, Mountain Pay, e-commerce stores. So I think the next step for Web3 in general is what everyone here on the panel is doing, bridging between Web 2, traditional finance, regulation, credit cards, the real world, and the ecosystem of Web 3. And I think everything in DeFi and all of those things, they will only really start to take off once we found a way for that bridge to bring on hundreds of millions of users into the ecosystem.
That's great. So kind of for our last topic, I kind of want to talk about the counterparts in the Web 2 space, whether it's Google Maps or Uber or just T-Mobile, who you guys actually, I think, have done some work with. But there's about 8 billion people on the planet, but not even a billion people have used crypto yet. Like most people think it's in like 2 million people use like a general purpose blockchain every day. So to get those people onboarded, for crypto to be successful, do we need to onboard billions and billions of people? Or is crypto kind of this niche thing where it's like this little part of the world that needs permissionlessness, that needs decentralized services, is what we're ultimately servicing? That might be different for different networks, but I'm kind of wondering how you guys think about that. Do you have a synergy with Google Maps, or do you have kind of like a competitiveness with them where you're the next iteration of them? You can take it away.
Yeah. Well, first of all, in terms of just broadly speaking, the billion or 2 billion people who ultimately are going to use Hivemapper and interact with our data and our maps probably won't even know that the thing was built through crypto. right? So crypto is really like how the map gets built and all the incentive mechanisms and protocols around that. And there'll be like a couple million people building and maintaining the map. But the billions of people who are using the map won't know, right? Like when we go in and talk to customers today, we don't lead with crypto, right? We lead with things like freshness, okay? Here's why we're fresher than Google Maps, right? Here's why we can expand our coverage to many more cities and countries over the world, right? And here's our quality bar, right? And that's what they care about. Like, they don't care about the crypto stuff. Like, actually, like, you're better off not talking about the crypto stuff because it'll scare their CFO. So, yeah, so getting back to your core question, though, in terms of Google Maps, yes, ultimately we are a competitor. Right now, there is not going to be a customer that's going to be like, I'm going to rip out Google Maps and put Hivemapper in. That's not realistic. It'll be like what we're seeing right now where the customer's like, okay, yes, I use Google Maps, but I want to add my own additional layer, and I'm going to use Hivemapper for that. That's one example. Or in this specific region where Google Street View is not providing me good coverage or good freshness or good quality, I'm going to use Hivemapper, but I'm not going to use it everywhere yet. So I think it'll be a gradual shift over time, not like a turn off, turn on. Then there's this whole question of like AR and VR, where the freshness factors, or the freshness criteria, I should say, are much, much higher than what Google will do, right? And that just has to do with like the mapping pipeline and the mapping process they have, which is very much centered around the Google Street View cars. So every Google Street View car costs about $500,000. A Hivemapper dash cam is roughly $500.
Yeah.
Right. So we can put 1 million dash cams, right, for $500 million bucks. For $500 million bucks, they get 1,000 Google Street View cars.
Daniel, if you want to go.
Yeah, no, I think the path to get that many people in the network is, like he said, is like you don't think it's crypto, just thinking you're building a better product overall. That at the end it's crypto backed, and I think crypto has this mechanism to allow these things to happen. It's still a very hard problem to solve to make it simple. Just look how long it took the internet to become something that we use today, right? And I think crypto is moving much faster than the internet was before. And by not thinking it's crypto, by building better tools and better services, it's going to be a natural transition. It's going to take time. I mean, it's happening, right? Helium had 1 million hotspots in like 2 years. The growth like exponential. So I think we're going towards the right direction.
Paul, if you want to go, and then we'll wrap up with the buy.
Absolutely. So I think to get into the mainstream, we got to build like the full infrastructure, and then we can actually collaborate on these things together to go further, right? So if you want to make an efficient ride-sharing network, you need things like proof of location. You need to actually, if a driver app, an open source app, reports their location, that's good, but they could have a different version that reports a different location. With Helium, for example, we could use their infrastructure to provide proof of location services to us. Similarly, in our network, we need mapping and traffic data, so it's really useful for us to integrate with people like Hivemapper or Demo. So I think there's a lot of infrastructure being built in parallel that will all of us help together serve a mainstream audience. And the mainstream audience might not even know that crypto is involved. Like, you might just have a wallet, and if you don't want to do anything with crypto, in our case, you push a button and it ends up in your bank account just like before. But if the ecosystem here steps up, and we really bring hundreds of millions of users and millions of drivers that have USDC to spend, and you guys find ways for them to spend it instead of waiting till it arrives to the bank account, then we will have mainstream usage.
We'll wrap up with Helium, since you guys kind of started this thing off.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think we all know in this room that this whole thing is still just an experiment. We're still very early in building this infrastructure, and we should all acknowledge that there are billions of people that just don't have access, and they don't have access to a lot of things. I know certainly, for us, it's really around connectivity and sort of getting connectivity to everyone, and doing that in a really capital efficient way. And I think it is important that the other parts of this need to be done as well, and in crypto infrastructure, I think onboarding and offboarding is really important. Until we all use USDC or maybe some other stable coin for our day-to-day lives to buy our fruits or pay for our kids' schools or whatever. Like, all that infrastructure still needs to be built, and we're all building in parallel. I think that is maybe the most interesting thing. I think there's a ton of smart people who've come from traditional companies, a lot of new people that have never experienced these sort of traditional companies, and just fundamentally believe there should be a better way to build these things. And we're all kind of coming together, and we're saying that this is sort of a new world and a new way of doing things, that we are really on this journey together. I'm really I feel lucky to be part of a community like this that just wants to try something new and do it the right way and bring as many people together as possible. And I think that's how we bring this to all 7 billion people or whatever in the world.
So most people don't realize we're actually a customer of Helium, right? So we actually are providing proof of location using Helium Network. And we were just talking about this a couple weeks ago, where it's there's no other service that could have done that at the cost that they're doing it at, right? So I think we spend probably next year maybe $100,000, $150,000, which in the grand scheme of things is nothing.
Yeah.
Given the fact that for a map you have to trust the data, and without that proof of location you can't trust the data.
That's great. So that about does it for us. This has been Why Decentralized Data Networks Matter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Walter from Galaxy, and I think we've got someone coming up next. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.